the 33rd degree master of the resets. All of you know that we're living in something different than what we've been taught. Tonight, we're going to reveal things that are being revealed to everyone, but almost no one's paying attention. Tonight will be one of the better broadcasts that we've ever had, so please pay attention and check this out. We'll be right back.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. Who is able to make war with him?
Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to the Midnight Ride. How exciting it is to be together with all of you again, to have another fantastic ride down the annals of time, looking at this absolutely fascinating concept of the reset. We have taken several stabs at this on the Midnight Ride, and the more I look at it, the more I know that there's really something to this. So this is going to be our deepest dive ever. So I guess the only thing left to say is let's ride. And it all begins right now because we're now
Live. What's up, guys? We're live from the Puritan Barn. Let us know where you're from in the chat. Let us know how you're doing and in the comment section. We're excited to kick this off. I'm glad to be here with David once again. It's always a blessing. And for those of you that don't know, me and David actually start doing a Q&A every Thursday. We're going to do a Q&A over on the Midnight Ride YouTube channel. We did one on Thursday, so if you feel inclined, go check it out. And we will be right back after a word from our sponsors. Many mainstream companies put dangerous chemicals in their products that contribute to disease and disability. This is why it's so important that we take care in the products that we consume. The skin is the largest organ in your body, and it is the covering to your temple. Our sponsor tonight is Sugar and Spice Soap Company. They create all natural and biblically clean soaps and beauty products. They even have a soap for Midnight Ride listeners. Use coupon code NYSTV to receive 10% off all your purchases. Link in the description. If this is true, then our country is in a lot of trouble.
We would have these trips, these special trips.
But he said my daddy takes the bodies to the grocery store and he grinds them up and puts it in the hamburger. And nobody ever knows it.
How can kids 6, 8, 10 years old be describing rituals that come from a book like the Book of the Dead?
it's hard to get your mind around people being capable of this kind of evil.
All right, guys, we're back. Thank you. And if you guys like anything that you see in that, go check it out in the link in the description. Also, I want to give you guys a opportunity to get some Midnight Ride mugs here that we have. You can get them 50% off over at Truther Fit if you use the code #TourAhead. The link is in the description. It's a great code to get half off, and I think you'll like these. There's not a ton of these left. I think that the last run of these is coming up here in the next week or two. So make sure you guys check them out. David, I know you guys got stuff going on over at FOJC. Let's hear about it.
Well, we're really excited. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Central Time on our FOJC Radio Underground Church YouTube channel, we're going to be rolling out installment number 4 of our Cities Lost in Time. with Brian Reese and myself. This one is going to be entitled Hawara, the Labyrinth of the Fallen Ones. I guarantee you, it'll get you going. It'll get you going. So that'll be there if you would like.
You don't hear much about that one, so that would be interesting.
Yeah, it is. I'm going to enjoy this, and I think y'all will too.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it. There's so much interesting stuff to talk about, so many things being revealed to us in this time. It's just a great time to be able to observe and to speak about it and to really just see the things come to life that we've been studying for many, many years. So I'm excited about it, David. Do you have anything else you want to add before we get started?
I think that's about it, John. Well, I think it's about time to ride.
All right, guys. So tonight we're going to be talking about the 33rd degree Masters of the Reset. And I wanted to bring several different concepts to this tonight that talks about how they are getting this information, to be able to obtain this information, to be able to master these resets the way that they're mastering them. And if it's any surprise to you that there have been resets through time, I can just name a couple biblical ones, but there are many, many more, I think, mentioned in Scripture and talked about, and we're going to be talking a little bit about those. But obviously the flood was a great reset. It resetted the entire world, left one family alive to continue the human race after that point. We also have a Tower of Babel type situation where the whole world came together as one to try to defeat God, and the tongues were confused and they were scattered. But in that time period, in that scattering, they were mentioned several times throughout the Scripture, Babylon is, and we're going to discuss that. And where does this stuff come from? Why are they able to handle this stuff? So tonight's topics, we'll be discussing stuff about the new world orders and their heirs, the significance of the 33rd degree, secret rulers and technology, descendants of Nimrod, and how they master the resets, Babylon the Great, and the acquisition of devil's tombs. And so if that doesn't strike your interest, you're probably in the wrong place. That's just my thought. But to get a kind of a grasp on some of the stuff that we talked about in one of our shows called The Tribe of Dan, the Blue Bloods, the mixing of the seed, and it was talking about how Dan, the story is much deeper than we had thought previously, and all of us had thought. And we looked into that, and we showed how there was seeding of civilizations taking place through the primitive world, post-flood, pre-flood, but this seeding of civilizations where they would go to these primitive people and they would teach them the art of being civilized. This is where we get the term civilization. They would also take them and show them how to mine. They would show them how to do these things, and then a lot of times they're described as coming staff in hand, looking like they're a shepherd. And then they leave and they tell them they're coming back. And this is the stories of these civilizations. And so if you want to get a more detailed look into that, I think that it would be good context for this show. But if you don't have time to watch that, which we're doing it live, so you're not going to be able to go watch it right now, just know that throughout every civilization, there are stories of these builders, of these architects, they're called Atlanteans in some scripts. They're called Watchers and others. This is the beings that come and did this to the entire world. So that gives us a kind of an ideology for what we're going to be talking about. And so I want to read Jasher chapter 7 and verse 35, starting in verse 35. It says, "And Nimrod went forth at that time, and he assembled all the sons of Cush and their families, about 460 men. And he hired also from some of his friends and acquaintances about 80 men. And he gave them their hire. And he went with them to battle. And when he was on the road, Nimrod strengthened the hearts of the people that went with him. And he said to them, 'Do not fear, neither be alarmed, for all our enemies will be delivered into our hands. And ye may do with them as you please.' And all the men that went were about 500, and they fought against their enemies, and they destroyed them and subdued them. And Nimrod placed standing officers over them in their respective places. And he took some of their children as security, and they were all servants to Nimrod and to his brethren. And Nimrod and all the people that were with him turned homeward. And when Nimrod had joyfully returned from battle after having conquered his enemies, all his brethren together with those who knew him before assembled to make him king over them, and they placed the regal crown upon his head. And he set over his subjects and people, princes, judges, and rulers, as is custom among kings. So it talks about how his journey to the top, how he defeated all of the Japhethites, he defeated all the Semites, and defeated all of the people around him to the point to where he took securities of their families, placed people in charge everywhere he went, and subdued the entire world through that. Now, there's a lot of talk in the scripture about how he did this, about him. In the Bible, it talks about him becoming a mighty man, he becoming a Gibberim, right? This is the term, mighty hero of sorts. And in this process, he becomes dominant over the entire world, and he builds this tower. And there's a lot to be said about Nimrod. Now, there's a lot of ancient texts that I believe can be attributed. Some of the stories that you hear in the Numa Lish about some of these kings, I believe they're talking about Nimrod there. And so, David, did you have anything you wanted to add about Nimrod and about that civilization? But basically, the reason I wanted to bring up Babylon is because it plays a huge point in the resets. It plays a huge role because the scripture tells us a lot about Babylon. But Nimrod, David, is there anything that I would, people that may be just listening that don't know a whole lot about Nimrod might want to hear before we continue?
Well, he was the trendsetter in so many ways. He was the one that was after the flood to initiate the push for the New World Order. And in what he did here, well, we go in, we remove their rulers, we put our rulers in, we impose our religion and our civilization upon them. That's what a reset is. That happened with the 10 tribes in Israel, and it's happened throughout time over and over and over again. There's a lot of these resets, and these are things that, Nimrod, he was the man, and this is a basic part of their strategy that they've used ever since the Tower of Babel.
Yep, and as we'll continue, we'll see. I want to show you guys something here. So we have the same beast system, the same beast mentioned in the Beast of Daniel, and Daniel describes this beast. You can read it, Second Esdras. For those of you who aren't familiar with Second Esdras, it could say Second Ezra. Ezra wrote in the Bible. Second Esdras is an apocryphal text, and then the Book of Revelation. Now, the difference in these, there's one text in Revelation 17 that mentions another player in this game. So we have the beast in Revelation, or we have the beast in Daniel, we have the beast in Second Esdras, we have the beast in Revelation. But I want to read this about this other entity that is involved in all of this, because there's some clues in here that I want to point out. And it says, "And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her head was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered in great admiration." So on top of this beast that's mentioned in Daniel, in Second Esdras, and in Revelation, we have this whore that rides the beast. And not only is she in charge of this beast and these kings for the time period, but she is the one who has committed abominations and caused the kings of the earth to commit abominations, caused them to be drunk on the abominations that she holds in her hand. Revelation 17, this will give us another clue, and it says, "And he said unto me, The waters which thou sawest where the horse sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth." So it says this woman is a great city that reigns over the king of the earth. And we get a clue about Babylon reigning over the entire earth when we look at in Genesis and the story of Nimrod. We also get a story of that with Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, all of these kings who at one time were dominant and did control the earth. And they had a knack for doing this. And in fact, they had such a knack, according to the Bible, that they subdued all of the kings. They controlled every single king of the earth, and do to this day, in my opinion, control them. And so just to kind of get a point out of these things here, the beast and Babylon are separate, yet the woman has influence and control over the kings. And in turn, the people of the land, in the end, the kings turn on her and destroy her. So in the end, this is what happens. But for the time period, we're going to do a little deep dive into Babylon and see who these people are and how they did this. And I want to show you how the show I mentioned with Dan kind of ties into all of this. Revelation 17, and it says, "And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth." Now, most people, and I included, are going to tie that to Rome, because there's 7 holy mountains that are in Rome, 7 mountains that they consider, which are in the time period we're talking about, all around the period of Israel and everything, because that was all considered part of Rome at the time. And to kind of just go from there, I want to discuss something here, because I found this, and it could be nothing, but I tend to believe that there's really not a whole lot of coincidences. So I started digging into the word hills here, and we're gonna take a little bit closer look at this. So the word in the Strong's is 3735, which is oros, and it means a mountain. Now, I looked at the derivatives of this word and where a lot of words were formed based off of this word in the Greek. And this will blow your mind, I think. It blew my mind. The etymology 1 of the word orizio, and I'm not pronouncing that right, but it says to awaken. And the etymology number 2 is guardian or watcher, which caused me to kind of take a real deep look into this idea. Like, why are these hills, why are these words derived from this? We know that a lot of our words derive from certain words because there's a meaning in there. In the Greek, it's no different. In the Latin, it's no different. In the English, it's no different. The Hebrew, it's no different. There's always the reason that they use these words. And so I just thought it was interesting, and it could be nothing. For all of you Greek philosophers out there, or Greek students, you may be able to tell me why that they use this word as a base for those words, but I thought it was interesting. So I wanted to dig a little bit into mud fossils. And David, you've done a show recently on that. There is a Mud Fossil University on YouTube as well that digs into a lot about these mud fossils. But we're starting to find that many of the rock formations that we thought were mountains, or that we thought were just random rocks, or we thought were just structures that people built, have features that look like they are actually fossilized giants and animals of sorts, to the point to where they cut them and they can see where it looks like there's veins and arteries running through the rocks, where it looks like muscle tissue, or where it looks like skin tissue, layers of these things associated with that. And this will come in handy when we're talking about here in a minute. But David, you've done a little bit of study on mud fossils. What are some ones that you found that are pretty interesting?
Yeah, Brian and I, we did a show, we called it Clear as Mud Fossils and Mud Flood. And there are many, many, many of these. There's the one, the Devil's Tower out in Arizona, and it looks like a tree stump. I mean, I don't know if it's a tree stump or not, but it looks like a tree stump. And there are so many of these that look like creatures. It's undeniable, that look like giant humans, various animals, and it's beyond the point of, well, if I look at it, it kind of looks like that. No, it looks like it, and what the Bible tells us, and many other non-biblical historical sources, that these early giants were huge. They were tall as the cedars, 200 feet. And to me, it is very, very possible. And I've come to the point, it's much easier for me to believe that these are fossilized remains of giant humans and animals than to look at it and see just what it looks like and deny what our eyes are seeing.
Yeah, and there's obviously the people that are going to be listening that say, well, the Bible doesn't talk about giants. It doesn't, there's no such thing. But I beg to differ. Genesis 6 is very clear on that. But also every other mythology, you can call them mythology, you can call them whatever you want, but every one has the same exact story. So at some point, you have to look at things and say, well, there's a story here. There's something being told here that makes a lot of sense. And so we're going to look at this as if it's real, as if it's true for a minute. Can you guys do that with me? Let's pretend it's true. So we did a couple shows before. Actually, one of these was featured on our marathon that we did, but giant angels chained in hollow earth and angels bound in the Euphrates. Now, the scripture speaks of entities being bound in the earth. The book of Enoch speaks of entities being bound within the earth. There's also these petrified giants looking things that we see all over the place. And these two shows do a good job of kind of talking a little bit about that in more detail, and how that the obsession of people like Hitler and different people who are, I guess I would say heirs of Nimrod, how they went going and looking for all of these pieces, whether it be the spear of destiny, whether it's the cloak that they believe Nimrod wore, whether it's the people in Hyperborea. Hitler used the money that he had to go and look for every single one of these things, and we're going to find out why, because this is what has to happen to be the master of the reset. Now, we did another concept just to kind of put more of these ideas of these hills into our mind before I kind of explain where we're going here. There are other locations on the earth that actually have a more cryptic meaning than what we totally understand. And one of these is hot sulfur places where people go and they take hot sulfur baths or drink the sulfur water. And the book of Enoch actually mentions these things as boiling entities. David, tell us a little bit about this. This is crazy.
Well, in the 67th chapter of the book of Enoch, and this is something that we have went into detail in this chapter in our book of Enoch commentary, but it says this very thing, that in the place deep in the earth where angels are chained and being punished, that this actually affects the surface of the earth in manifestation of hot sulfur springs. And I'll just read a little of the text for you. In Enoch chapter 67, beginning in verse 5, it says, "And I saw that valley in which there was a great convulsion, with the convulsion of the waters. And when all this took place, from that fiery molten metal, and from the convulsion thereof in that place, there was produced a smell of sulfur. And it was connected with those waters. And that valley of the angels who had been led astray, burned, who had led astray mankind, burned beneath that land. And through its valleys proceed streams of fire, where these angels are punished who had led astray those who dwell upon the earth. But those waters shall in those days serve for the kings and the mighty and the exalted, and those who dwell on the earth for the healing of the body." And then in verse 11, it talks about a change that's going to happen prophetically, and probably at the time of the release of the restrainer, when these will be actually going to come back. In verse 11, it says, "And those same waters will undergo a change in those days. For when those angels are punished in these water springs shall change their temperature. And when the angels ascend, this water of the spring shall change and become cold." So it's very, very fascinating. And what can you say?
It's interesting. There's definitely more to this than what we understand. There's no doubt. And so that leads to the question, there's all of these interesting sites all over the world that have this hidden significance. Let's just say hidden significance. So what is the fascination of these kings, these churches building over these sites, these bound devils? What is the point of this? And I think that we're going to find out here. So these are a couple temples that were actually built. They were built on top of these old temples. This one on the left here is the Acropolis of Athens, and it was built. There was something built on top of it, and on top of here, like church built on top of that in Rome. And then you have 1800s revealed, and beneath the church is the ruins of the Greek temple theater of Dionysus. So you have two of these ancient gods in these temples, and this is just a couple of them. And of course, the Vatican is built over the necropolis, the city of the dead. And so they use a lot of these places for this reason. And if you look at, like, look at a lot of these locations that were maybe not just built now, but also around prehistory that we're just finding, you start to see a grid pattern. You see grid patterns and ley lines that a lot of these places were sitting on, which can lead to a million different ideas about what these places are and why that they're sitting on these grid lines. But I think that, the people that are masters of the reset, the ones who are the 33rd degree, which it's said that the 33rd degree, the ones who are able to use the seething energies of Lucifer, are the ones who are able to I guess, what is the exact quote there, David? I know you've got it probably on the tip of your tongue from Manly P. Hall, but about the seething energies of Lucifer.
Yeah, the text says that before Freemason can move onward and upward in the craft, he has to learn how to apply energy. And he goes on to say the seething energies of Lucifer must be in his hands. And we, in a previous Midnight Ride, we did a lot of research pinpointing this, connecting it to the manipulation of the aether.
Yeah. And I think, and you'll see why I think this here in a minute, but I think the reason that they're going and they're setting their shop up over these locations is because the people that are doing this do lay a right to these locations, because I do believe that they are either priesthood descendants or physical descendants of Nimrod himself, and they understand that in order for them to understand the secrets and be able to build technology up to a level that it once was, they have to recover these ancient sites, and they have to find the secrets associated, and they have to figure out how these things worked. And it's amazing when we start to see a little evidence of what we're talking about here. So this is out of the book Babylon's Banksters, and in this book it has a couple details here in the book that show the construction of these temples and how they're actually conceived and what they're actually built like. And if you look at these, they're all very similar in the design with the columns and all of that. And if you look at this next one here, this is a modern Megatron here on the left, and on the right is the floor plan of the temple and the palace of the Emperor Diocletian. So in order for a radio of sorts, or a transistor, or something to receive information, a magnetron is the most important part of that machine. You have to have the magnetron. And the theory posed in this book, Babylon Banksters by Joseph Farrell, is that these temples acted as sort of a magnetron. They acted as a receiver for shortwave information, long-wave information, and that each temple was associated with a god and had its own frequency associated with that god. And he said that the main gods actually had a continual frequency and not just shortwave. It's pretty interesting the way that he outlined this. And so what we're talking about here is building over a site. And why did these build over these sites? Why are they associated with these sites? And what are they pulling from this information? This is the question. And this is a video here. This is I've got who made this video on here. It says it in the text, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But you guys might be familiar. Rob Skiba interviewed a man about the altars in Jekyll Island, and this is a short part of that interview, and it details the idea that Rockefeller and several of his buddies, the most powerful men in the world, formulated the Federal Reserve on Jekyll Island over a baby sacrifice mound. And so we're going to watch this, and this might give us a little bit of an idea. I don't want to put ideas in your head. I want you to have your own ideas. So you tell me what you think about this after hearing what we just heard there, and we'll be right back, guys. So listen up. This is a few minutes, but it's well worth it and very interesting. Trust me.
Top of a blood sacrifice altar. He said, well, Rockefeller was.
I'm here in Jekyll Island, Georgia, one of the most mysterious places in the country. Some call it the Bohemian Grove of the East Coast. This island also holds secrets that are key to unlocking why the world is the way it is today. Behind me is a place called Indian Mound, which is actually home to the Rockefellers, and I'm here investigating a mystery that most people have never heard before. This mystery has been shrouded in secrecy for almost 100 years.
Jekyll Island is where the Federal Reserve banking system was birthed and conceived. And at one time, when it was functioning in the 1900s up to the 20s and 30s, some say 1/3, some say 2/3 of the world's wealth would vacation on that island. Mm-hmm. It was the highest conglomeration of wealth in a single place very often anywhere in the world back in the turn of the century. So it just seems like a little island that's not anything significant at all now, but it's amazing to see the financial side of the history of that spot. And so I'm sitting there looking at some of the things that he's telling, and just thinking about some of the things he's telling me. We went out and walked around, and he showed me some of the cottages that had been restored, and the club itself, and the tennis courts, and they had a pier where the boats would come up, and he's just kind of showing me the grounds, and then we go to the museum. And he's talking a lot about the financial stuff and the guys that built it, and each cottage was, marked and named. Some of them had been restored, some of them didn't exist anymore, but they had like a sign that this is where this one was, and that one was built by J.P. Morgan, that one was Rockefeller's, and, that one was they had each one of them named. Well, they're all kind of native names, and then they're all, got some kind of a plaque on who the financial mogul was that had built them. And they're not really elaborate, luxurious mansions. They're just simple cottages for the most part, which was kind of interesting to know that the richest people in the world built them, and they were very low-key and almost like a, cabin in the woods instead of a luxurious house like you'd expect. And they all had Indian names. So I started asking him about the Indian history of the island, and he lit up. He just was like, that's what he really wanted to talk about, because he loved the Indian history. And so he takes me back to the museum, and he said, we got a lot of stuff on the Indians. He said this was actually like the government main community for a tribe of Indians that don't exist anymore. That tribe was called the Timucas. And I said, well, that's interesting. My name's Tim. And anyway, I didn't know anything about the Timucas. I'm from Oklahoma. I've learned a lot of Native history, and I have some Native bloodline, but I did not know anything about the Timucas. So I just asked him, please tell me everything that you can tell me about them. There's something about the natives that I feel like I need to know. So he said, well, the Jekyll Island Club was actually built on top of everything that the Indians had. So they just kind of wiped the village out and built the club on top of it. So wherever the chief's house was, there was a cottage now. Wherever the council house was, there was now the Jekyll Island Hotel. And he said everything that's built and visible today is actually sitting right on top of something that was significant in the Indian village when it existed. So he said the fact that this whole place had to go into ruins and then be rebuilt and become an archaeological state park, he said it actually helped us identify the native history, because the club itself had almost erased that. And so I said, well, let's look at the museum. I want to see some of the Indian stuff. So we're looking at arrowheads and spear tips and, just artifacts that they had found, and pottery shards and things, and seashells that they had. And he's showing me all their stuff in the museum. He shows me some fragments of a weapon that was like an unusual bow. And when I say unusual, I mean that it was like a double curved bow. And that was a very unusual shape of a bow for a native tribe. I had never seen that shape before with an American Indian tribe. And I've seen a lot of bows and arrows. So I asked him, I said, this seems unusual. I've not seen this before. In Oklahoma, every native tribe, the bows would look like a single bow or just a single curve. I said, this is quite extraordinary, especially as far back as this tribe was. So He said, yeah, we found a lot of weapon-type artifacts that we've not seen with other tribes. And I said, well, how do you know these were Native Americans? Maybe they were from somewhere else. He said, oh, no, they were the Timucua, because they're well established along the Florida and Georgia coast, and he said we got a lot of stuff in 3 or 4 states about them, and they were quite prolific at one time. So he said, we know they're Native Americans. I said, well, all right, what else you got? He said, well, we got some skeletons. He said, you want to see the bones? And I said, well, yeah. That sounds, you don't get to see a skeleton very often. I said, are they where we can actually see them, or are they buried? He said, no, they're visible. So they had a burial site that they had been very respectful for when they built the museum. When they found a burial site, they didn't move the bones. They left them where they were, and they just uncovered them to where they were visible, and then they built the museum on top of it. They did basically the same thing with the museum that the Jekyll Island guys had done with their houses. They put a piece of plexiglass over the burial site so you could see it, but they were still trying to respect where the bones were and not move them. And so I'm looking at 4 skeletons of the Timucua chiefs. And they knew they were chiefs just from different things that were buried with them. So all of a sudden I look and I realize, man, these guys are really tall. And I commented to the guy that, how tall are these guys? They look unusually large. And he said, yeah, they're all about 8 or 8.5 foot tall. I was like, well, that doesn't seem like a normal Native American, especially the tribes that I'm familiar with. He said all the Timucuas were unusually tall, even the women. And he said we found other skeletons and parts of bones out in the grounds, and he said we've got pretty good evidence that nearly all of them were extraordinarily tall. And I said, well, what is how do you explain that in relation to other tribes on the Atlantic coast who were not? He said, I don't know. It is an unusual anomaly. He said, oh, by the way, I've got a painting that you might want to see. It's actually the copy of the original. We've got it under lock and key. He said, I got a painting that actually shows the Indians from a group of French colonists that came to the United States before it was the U.S. This was right after Columbus. He said that it was the first colony of French folks that came over to try to establish a colony on the coast. And he said they landed in Jekyll Island, and they had some interaction with these Indians, and then they got so appalled by what they saw and witnessed that they fled at night and ended up in San Augustine, Florida, and established that city. So I said, were they the Huguenots who were the French group that established San Augustine? He said, yes. I said, well, I'd like to see that painting then. So he pulls that out. I'm looking at it, and it shows the Indians and all their regalia, and they're dancing around and having some kind of ceremony, and it's got the fire, and it's a typical, either they're having a party or they're having a war scene, and it has some things with the weapons. So I said, gosh, this has got some weapons in it that clearly validates the archaeology that they found. And then I see an altar. And I'm going, I don't know of a Native American tribe anywhere in the country. I know some that had log houses or high places or worshipped, nature in some way or had totem poles or that kind of stuff. But this one has a stone altar, and it looks a whole lot like the one that I had dealt with in the Middle East. And I'm looking at the picture, and I'm going, is this an altar? Is this stone like something they're sacrificing on? Because this guy's holding babies in his hands in this picture. He said, yeah, they're cutting those babies, they're hacking those babies up in that painting. And so when you look at the details, 2 of the shamans or chiefs are holding a baby up by the ankles, and they're whacking their heads off and spilling the blood on this altar. I said, are you sure this is Native Americans and not some kind of colony that came from over there? at that point, then I thought, I believe this is why I'm here. I needed to see this and hear about this. At this point, I'm not that concerned about the financial stuff anymore. I'm wanting to know, where is this altar? And so I asked him, I said, can you take me to this altar? I often pray over these things, and it's very beneficial for the land and for the country and for the people. Can I go to this altar and see it? He said, I can take you to the altar, but you can't see it. And I said, why can't I see it? Is it buried? He said, no, it's not buried, but it has a house built on top of it. I said, who would be crazy enough to build their house on top of a blood sacrifice altar? He said, well, Rockefeller was. I just, okay. Can we go there? And he said, yeah, it's just a short walk. Come on. And we've actually, I'd already walked by it. So he said, I've got the keys. He said, normally nobody can go in. The way these things are set up, they're historical homes now. The state of Georgia owns the park. They lease out to another group, the hotel, to run, but the houses are maintained on the National Historical Register, and they're part of the state park. So you can't go in any of them without a guided tour or permission, but you can go look in the windows and walk on the porches and walk all around them. And they're set up inside just like they were when they were actually being used back in the 20s and earlier. So we go over there, and he's got the keys, though. So we go into the house, and he takes me into the parlor, and he says, well, I know you're a praying guy, so you probably would like to have a little time to pray. He said, you're standing right on top of the altar right now. This is the room that is built on top of it. He said, I'm just going to go over here and sit down for a few minutes and read the newspaper, and I'll let you pray and do whatever you need to do. The room that they were sitting in when they drew up the entire legislation and plan to pass it that became the Federal Reserve Act. So this was the conception of the Federal Reserve banking system on the parlor sitting on top of a blood sacrifice altar.
If that's not chilling, I don't know what is, but it's interesting to me that a lot of very important things take place in temples. This is where the minting of money takes place. This is where, in ancient times, this is where the money was circulate. This is where the revelations of the prophets and the seers and whatever priestesses that they had would come from inside of these ancient places. And other than... there's several ideas that I have here, and of course people are going to be like, well, how could there be, these Indians over here at the time? But if you look at history and you look at the archaeology, it's clear that they were here. Columbus wasn't stupid. He'd been to India before, and when he said that there were Indians here, he meant Indians, and Indians are considered, there's light-skinned Indians, Aryan Indians, that's actually the Aryan text is what the Vedic text is. The Hindu religion is the Aryan religion. So he wasn't stupid when he said it. There were those people here. You see it in South America. You see the same legends in South America. There's these ruling class people that come and they take control of the primitive people and they become the ruling class. And this is very well documented through almost every Native American story. They have these legends. And so it's really interesting. David, you want to add something?
Well, there are many instances, and this is chilling. And I mean, it beggars the imagination for me to even surmise for a moment that this is coincidental. It is not. These people that are the planners and the architects of these type of things, they know what they're doing. And we had the same scenario play out in South America with the Patagonian giants when the Spanish explorers came down there, and basically they instigated an extermination. And it up into the 1800s, they were still tracking down and killing these Patagonian giants. So this is a pattern that was replayed in several places. And, these were basically people that came over from a Levant they were of the Nephilim bloodline, and they were basically practicing Canaanite religion.
Yeah, and a couple of these people you guys are going to recognize these names. Of course, the Rothschilds, they had a part in this. Rothschild was not at the meeting, but through Paul Warburg, who was a person that went proxy for the Rothschilds. They were involved in the Federal Reserve, and they were involved in the international banking system, and they still are. They're trillionaires, worth more than anybody even can think about. They make Elon Musk look like a pauper. They make Mark Zuckerberg look like he needs to beg for cans on the side of the street. This is how rich these people are. Now, Paul Warburg, and for those of you that don't know who he is, David talked a little bit about his associations. I believe you talked about his associations in the Nazi International talk that you did. But Paul Warburg was probably the most important person at this Federal Reserve establishment on Jekyll Island. And he had the knowledge of banking that he practiced in Europe. He was part of Kuhn, Loeb and Company, and he was a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France. And he maintained a very close working relationship throughout his entire career. And Max Warburg, he was the head of the Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and in Netherlands. And he is also one of the most wealthiest men in the world at the time. He also called for the founding of the Council of Foreign Relations, the CFR, in 1921. The CFR being another tool, basically, of the global elite to oversee everything. And he also led the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve and Council of Foreign Relations, through IG Farben. American IG was one of the branches. And if you guys remember, IG Farben, they were the ones who supplied the gas for the gas chambers, and they also fueled through financing lots and lots and lots of money the German war machine during World War II. And there are also connections to him and his company behind the Bolshevik Revolution. Millions and billions of dollars were dumped by these guys into these. So these are the guys who have been playing the world for a very long time. This is who we're talking about here. When we talk about Babylon, we're talking about these people. The scripture in Revelation even talks about them being the merchants, which we'll discuss that a little bit more, and why that's important, because that's exactly what these so-called Atlanteans that were visiting all over the world, teaching people. They were merchants. They were teaching people to be merchants so they could travel from place to place all over the sea. We read about it in where Solomon had these Phoenicians going 3 years out to get apes and get elephants for them, get peacocks, had them going to get gold from Ophir, 3 years journey away. So they were traveling the world, setting up little Babylons everywhere they went. And I'm going to read this as from Babylon Banksters. This is actually a really interesting book. Joseph Farrell, for those of you who haven't heard of him, I believe that when it comes to research, there's not a whole lot of people that have done the depths of research into some of these subjects that he has done. And so it's really kind of a blessing to be able to have this book. David bought this book for me. It was a blessing to be able to have this book during this research, because it definitely tied in some dots here. So we're going to read a little bit about this, why it matters, who they are, first off. Actually, before we do this, I do want to say some things about the location of these places and how it relates to other things that we've talked about. And David, maybe you want to chime in on this as well. So we found throughout most of our research, so have other people such as Graham Hancock and people of the sorts, that these locations are sitting astrologically in alignment with several entity stars. And I call them entity stars because they're called entities, and they are representations of angelic entities. Now, the idea of the occult is as above, so below. And so from what I can gather from reading the information, there's a hidden undertone that these people believe that when they build on top of these locations that are in alignment with the stars above, they are directly over the top of that entity inside the hill or wherever above the ground that they have, and they are able to transmit some resonance, some kind of sound, some kind of information, or maybe even pass information from these locations based on the chart maps, the star maps, which are actually in line with the ley lines. So it's really interesting as why they chose these locations. I believe they understand how these things work, and that's why when there's a new location that pops up, guess who's the first one in to get control over that situation? Guess who builds more locations over these old places than any other organization in the world? And I bet you can guess in 2 or 3 guesses, but we have the Catholic Church as one of the main ones who does this. And we know that Babylon and the Catholic Church, it's impossible to read the text in Revelation without tying the Roman Catholic Church into the Whore of Babylon. It's very impossible. David, before I move on to this next aspect, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Because we've been to several locations. We've been to the Serpent Mounds. We've been to all these places. It's amazing.
Yeah, and you can see this in South America. There are many places where you can literally see these Catholic churches, and you can see the ruins of these pagan temples right underneath it. Yeah. And there are just so many concepts here of the and it is so ridiculous to think. Well, and at one time when we were at war with Germany, Paul Warburg was the head of the Federal Reserve, and Max Warburg, his brother, was the head of the central bank in Germany. Yeah. Both of them were just Rothschild employees. Yep. And these ley lines, a lot of it is a natural physical phenomenon that has to do with electromagnetics. And I've talked several times how that I believe that Einstein's physics is just physics for stupid people. But the plasma physics and the concepts underlying Tesla, he found out that if you shoot energy into the ground, you actually get more energy out than you put in. Yeah. And the old echoes of Tesla's earthquake machine. So these things they're part of it is based upon things like electromagnetism, as above, so below, building things on earth that align with the heavenly luminaries. But there's a spiritual dynamic to it too, the actual entity being there. Yeah. You know, this is the dot that connects, that makes this so absolutely profound right there.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and this next aspect is really interesting part too, something that of course we've talked about, but being able to tie it into how they're able to obtain this information really starts making a lot of sense. Now, in the occult world and in the world of the elites, bloodline matters. It matters greatly in how much magic you have in your blood, how much Anunnaki blood you have. It matters in how much magic you're able to pull off. And in fact, I believe that the only way to attain your 33rd degree and to be able to master the energies of Lucifer is because of bloodline. If you don't have the bloodline and it doesn't resonate with the area, you are not able to do this. And I believe this, and I want to read a couple things that really interest me, as in the idea that the people who can obtain this have to be of the proper bloodline, I believe, of Nimrod or someone like him. So let me read this. This is out of Babylon's Banksters, and this is really interesting. It says, and this is in context of the myth, the idea that Nimrod and the Rothschilds are in fact blood related, which is a very common ideology and thought. A lot of people believe it, and some people believe they've tied it in. But this is really interesting. So it says, if DNA is such a resonator and transducer of information, which they proved in the earlier chapter that DNA can resonate to certain frequencies. Certain DNA resonates to different frequencies differently, okay? So with that in mind, it says, the local field of the physical medium, it stands to reason that some specific genotypes will be more efficient resonators of it than others. We are told in countless ancient texts, from the Bible to the Sumerian epics of the Hindu epics of India, to the legends of the Japanese Yamato peoples, to the legend of Mesoamerican Indians, that at some point of time, lost in the mist of prehistory and the gods, came down and they mingled with men. We hear about that in Genesis 6, siring children of human women. And many of these legends, moreover, these ancient civilized gods were selfly evident white Caucasians. Again, this is a common feature of such myths from Mesoamerica to the South American Incans and even ancient Japanese legends, which is what I was saying earlier. It says, whatever the truthfulness of these claims might be, we have seen that since ancient times an international banking class has constantly aligned itself with the temple. That's a very key importance here. It says, both with a view to giving their financial activities the sanction of the probity of the temple, and therefore cloaking their actions, but also with a view to accessing the residues of that lost science and technology, and potentially reconstructing and reconstituting it. So it goes on here in this book to talk about this genome project that they're doing, that is Rothschilds are in charge of. This is really interesting. But and he says here again, the myth of the Rothschilds' descent from Nimrod, himself a product of such intermarriages, if one consults the Sumerian records, suggests that one such banking dynasty is aware of the connection. And it goes on to talk about how they're trying to pull DNA and get everybody's DNA so they can reconstruct that DNA resonance, so they can pull all of that information in to themselves. And it's really interesting. You know, one thing that strikes me, David, in the Bible, it talks about the man who understands dark sentences. This guy can just get the information. He can just pull it. And there's something different about this guy it talks about in the Bible. It's really interesting to me, but I do believe that DNA plays a major part. This is why you see these elites flooding toward Canaanite religions, these elites flooding towards blood sacrifice and flooding towards these ancient sites so that they can pull as much information as they can from it. Did you have anything you wanted to add, David?
Well, if that being true, it would make one suspicious at some things we've seen of people wanting to have mass databases of human DNA.
Yeah, that would make sense. And I remember when they started doing that. Do you remember when it was? It was like a advertisement. They just kept on like poking people to do it. Now almost everybody in the world, just about, that I've talked to, has done it at some point, you know, put their DNA in this database. And so anyways, we want to talk about this first transgression of the building of a temple in a location to where they felt like they could harness the energy of the world. And to me, when you think of the Tower of Babel, it is a almost mirror but evil twin to the temple of God. You have the idea that these people are all coming together into one temple, into one place, but they're not doing it underneath the power of God. They're doing it underneath the different power, and they have a different idea on how they're going to do it. I want to read this in Jasher 9. I'm also going to read a reference in the Bible to this, but I think that this is good for context to help you understand what they were doing here, because in Jasher, it actually kind of describes this as almost like they literally believed that they were going to get up there in the firmament and go towards God. So let's read it. It says, "And King Nimrod reigned securely, and all the earth was under his control. And all the earth was of one tongue and words of union. And all the princes of Nimrod and his great men took counsel together, put Mizraim, Cush, and Canaan with all their families. And they said to each other, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and in a strong tower, and its top reaching heaven. And we will make ourselves famed, so that when we may reign upon the whole world, in order that the evil of our enemies may cease from us, that we may reign mightily over them, and that we may not become scattered over the earth on the count of their wars. And they all went before the king, and they told the king these words. And the king agreed with them in this affair, and he did so. And all the families assembled, consisting of about 600,000 men, and they went to seek an extensive piece of ground to build the city and the tower. They sought in the whole earth. So they were looking for whatever ground they were looking. They were looking intently for this place. So they didn't just pick a random spot and say, blah, let's build it here. So it says they went all over the whole earth, and they found none like one valley at the east of the land of Shinar. About 2 days' walk, and they journeyed there, and they dwelt there. And of course, we know what they found there. We have the Anunnaki, the Anakim. We have all of these giants that are in that area right at the time. And it says, and they began to make bricks and burn fires to build the city, and the tower that they had imagined to complete. And the building of the tower was unto them a transgression and a sin. And they began to build it, and whilst they were building against the Lord God of heaven, they imagined in their hearts to war against him and to ascend into heaven. And so in Genesis 11, same story. And they said, Go to, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach into the heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. So they made this tower knowing that there was a chance that they were going to be scattered. And why would they know that they're going to be scattered unless they got information from somebody that this was a possibility of a reset, right? Why would they believe that the reset was possible unless they knew from some other source? And it says, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they began to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do." So it says that basically all these people coming together and doing this, nothing's going to be restrained from them, which tells you that there's power in bringing all the DNA of all the people together in the world, right? There's power, and that's why they're wanting to do it again. It says, "Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city." In one of the shows, we talked about Attila the Hun, and we talked about Nimrod before, and how Genghis Khan claimed to be a descendant from Nimrod. Now, we know a lot about Genghis Khan. We know a lot about the Huns because we've really detailed and studied in there. And they are basically the equivalent to our knights, our equivalent to our Templars, the equivalent to our people who went throughout the earth conquering and doing crazy things, even drinking out of skulls. I mean, there's a lot going on with these types of people, but they claim to be of lineage of that. A lot of kings claim to be of lineage of these of this Nimrod, and they went out and they scattered. But you know, when you look at some of the symbols that I see, and I believe that these symbols tell us everything about who we're dealing with, what order is in charge of a nation. When we see the symbols, the commonality symbols that we see with us in Rome and with us in the Vatican, we see the tower to Osiris, the phallic symbol that represents Osiris's phallic symbol. We see it as our Washington Monument. As the founder of our country, this is the symbol that we have in him. And George Washington's an interesting creature, to say the least. He didn't have any children. He's apotheosed as a god. He's in the apotheosis. His name is very interesting. If you look at it, you take the W and you take the G. If you take the W and you split it up and turn it upside down, you've got this, and you put the G in the middle. There's so many symbols surrounding this man that show us that this is the incarnation of sorts, maybe even just spiritual, of Nimrod here in America. You have it in all of these other places where this domination of banksters is in control. David, you got anything you want to add to that before I move on to the next slide here?
Well, you know, George Washington is revered by many as a godly man, and there's certainly much good we could say about him. But one of the interesting things about him, when him and Martha would go to church, he would never take communion. And Martha, and finally him and Martha and the pastor brought this up, you know, you don't take communion, you're offending people. And after that, he never come back again. Yeah. And it's known that he was baptized in the area now where Georgetown University is, that he sent his slaves over to bring a Jesuit priest to baptize him by a Jesuit priest just literally hours before he died. So a lot of interesting things there about Mr. Washington that we could say.
Agreed. And to kind of just think about this 33rd degree for a second. You know, we talked about how I believe that it has to do with DNA. I don't think you're getting to 33rd degree unless you have the proper DNA, and you literally are able to use the seething energies of Lucifer to do your bidding. I don't believe it's possible otherwise. Now, if you think about the 33 in the Bible, it talks about the dragon pulling 1/3 of the angels down to earth with him. 1/3 is the percentage of that is 33.33333. There's a lot of significance to this 33. There's a lot of significance into the people that rule, the reason they have the right to rule. It's not so much, you know, people think, well, you know, there's millions of us and one of them, how do they rule? They rule because of magic. They magically rule over the kings of the earth. These people that are printing money are literally ruling over the kings of the earth who have every bit of God-given power to say, no, not going to do it. But yet they do. Why? Why is that? Now let's read this right here. This is Isaiah 47. This is speaking of the children of Chaldea, the children of Babylon. This is speaking to them right here. This is really kind of plays out exactly what we're talking about here, because we talked about the astrotheology of these people. We talked about their merchantry, that it was all over the earth. So let's read this. It says, let me see here. It says, stand now with thine enchantments, and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth. If so be thou shalt be able to profit, if so be thou mayest prevail, thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsel. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, and the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from these things that will come upon thee. Behold, they shall be as stubble, the fire shall burn them, and they shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There shall not be a coal to warm them, no fire to sit before it. Thus shall they be unto thee, with whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth. They shall wander every one to his quarter, none shall be seen. So it talks about the astrologers, it talks about the sorceries, that they're actually able to make rule here. They're able to sit on their throne so long because they have these sorceries. Now, do I believe that all these things are false? These sorceries, these stargazing? No, I believe that they're legitimate. Witchcraft. They're a legitimate craft, and they're legitimately pulling information. Now, not all pulling of information from the stars is witchcraft. The Bible speaks. David says that the stars pour out information. Unfortunately, we have lost so much of that information. It remains in the hands of a very few people, the source of information about the stars. But I do believe 100% that the stars, the way that they move and the way that it all moves, greatly affects everything that goes down here on earth. And they're able to take that information and use it. Now, this is being revealed to a lot of people. They don't like this. They don't like that this information is being revealed, because if everybody understands that you can pull this or pull that and use this, wield this power, then we start to get this dwindling of where they get their power, because their power comes from knowledge, right? Their power comes from all of these informations, these secret technologies that they have. And I'm going to call it magic, because technology is magic. There's not a whole lot of difference in technology and magic. If you were to take any bit of our technology, if you were to take this and you were to take it back to even the 1700s, you would probably get burned as a witch, right? Because a lot of this information isn't something that humans as normal beings are going to come up with. It takes a specific kind of human to want to make this happen. Most people just want to be happy and left alone. That's 99% of humans want to be happy. They want to be left alone, and they want to just do what they want to do and enjoy their life in freedom. That's what most people want. However, there's this 1% of this 1% that just can't have that. They just can't have it. They have to be in control. They have to be the ones who master the resets. They have to be the ones who take the information, displace it, and put you underneath their reign. And I do believe that there have been many resets. David, you were showing me some pictures of these asylums that were placed strategically throughout the world. We talked about the Oddfellows building asylums that housed orphans, and the idea that these orphans were being used for a much deeper, darker purpose. If you didn't watch the Cabbage Patch Doll show, you should go check it out, because it's going to blow your mind as well. But this is the kind of stuff that we have from these people. We have this information. We don't even know if half the information and half the history that we've received is 100% legit. In fact, we know it's not. I know it's not. When you look at comparative history and you start studying, you see that the symbols tell a different story than what some of the historians are telling. So, David, you had some information on some of that, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of these pictures that if you go back into the early 1800s in America and in other parts of the world, that these things are unbelievably huge. They would house 20 to 50,000 people. There would be huge graveyards in these places. And, I mean, is there that many crazy people? I mean, we're talking huge.
Yeah.
And one of the theories is, and the farther I go along, the more that I would prescribe to this, is that this is a part of the reset of the Tartarian people, that a lot of the children and the families of the Tartarians were put into these things. And I also believe that a lot of the concept of the star fort, we talked about that also, that the Tartarian people built these for healing and also literally for protection from these energies that were being directed at them. Now, that might sound wild to a lot of people, but there's a lot of very legitimate reasons why we would come to that conclusion.
Yeah, man, agreed. And I'm going to read this from Babylon's Banksters, because I think that Joseph Farrell puts it really, really good about what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it. Why is the money thing so important? The printing of money is paramount to their ability to do what they think they're going to do. Now we saw in Revelation that the whore of Babylon is actually hated by the 10 kings that were going to rise up in the end times. We see that, and it's starting to play out in front of us right now. If you're paying attention, there's a clear war going on, a clear, at least propaganda war going on between two different groups of people. And I'm not going to mention those groups of people. If you don't know, you're not paying attention. If you haven't seen what's going on with the money system, with the people in charge of the money system, who's at war, who's have a propaganda war, then you're not paying attention. I shouldn't have to mention that. I think that is something that we all know, that there's a war of good and evil. We all know this. And we all know that the ones in charge of our system are the wicked ones. We know this. The Bible tells us we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, all of this. You know, the word principality this is what we call our local places. The people in charge are our principalities, our principals, right? They are the ones in charge. The people in charge. We know this. We know that we're in charge of this. Jesus knew this. When Satan offered him the kingdoms of the world, he knew who was in charge of those kingdoms. So we know who's in charge of those kingdoms. We know that Jesus also, what did he do? What is one act of violence that Jesus did while he was on earth? The only act of violence that we're aware of is he took a whip, he braided a whip, he went into the temple, and he whipped the money changers, all the animals, knocked them out, flipped their tables, and told them that they've made it a den of thieves. We know, and he called them serpents. He called them synagogues of the evil one, Satan. He called them these things because he knew who they were. He knew who was in charge. He knew who was going to put him to death. And we know the same thing through this. Reading this real quick, and then I want more comments from you, David, so we can just kind of wrap this up and discuss this a little bit and kind of offer the people a little bit of things about what we can do as believers to kind of combat what's coming. The Bible talks about us being the war axe, battle axe of Yah. And so this is really interesting. So let's go this. It says in page 205 of Babylon's Banksters, it says, but there is another possibility, which I think this is the possibility. This is the only explanation that makes sense to me in light of everything that we've learned. It says the cosmic war. They're preparing for a cosmic war. And the survivors of the once scientifically sophisticated civilizations were ever to reach the pinnacle of scientific power and achievement that would have made an interplanetary war possible, if that is, they were ever to reconstruct the destructive technologies of their hegemony and extend themselves again into space, then they would have quite literally to draw on the full resources of the entire world and to create the wars, conflicts that drove technology achievement forward at a faster than normal pace of development. In this case, they would develop not only secret associations for this purpose, but money and a close association with Timbals would be the easiest and least technologically sophisticated method to do it. And the political goal would be the same, ever larger empires, eventually to encompass the entire world itself. This is what they're doing. This is why we're seeing a digital money putting into place, because through this digital money, they can pool all the resources of the world to fight what they are going to be calling a cosmic war. They don't want to lose to the 10 kings. The Whore of Babylon does not want to lose to the 10 kings. It doesn't want to lose to God. There's a revenge thing going on here. You know, they killed our the Anunnaki. They separated us all over the world. God separated us all over the world. This time, we'll be ready. This is what they're thinking in their head. I believe this 100%. I think they can win. I really, really do. And when we see this play out, we see all this money coming to a common goal, we know that something's up. We know it. I remember seeing King Charles speaking and saying, you know, we have to gather all this money. And I don't remember the exact quote, but we have to gather it for him when he comes. Who's him? Your guess is as good as mine, but I think that I think we know. David, what else do you think would be crucial to add to this information that would help people kind of be able to come to the light of God? Because obviously that's the most important thing here tonight. I believe that we're all in darkness when we are born. We're born into darkness. We continue in darkness until we see the light. And so I think it's important that we see the light. Otherwise, this stuff makes no sense. This stuff has no bearing on life at all. Knowing this information means nothing, but we have to have hope. We have to believe that the kingdom is coming and that our kingdom is much more powerful than these guys right here. They think they got the all power. They think they got all the intelligence companies in the world rocked up, but they don't know about the ultimate intelligence. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, that which was set in place in Jekyll Island in instituting the Federal Reserve, that is what is destroying and will destroy our nation at this very moment. Such an oxymoron with the Federal Reserve. It is neither federal nor is it reserved. It is privately owned by these international bankers, and always, and it's the bewitchment. It's the bewitchment. Well, we have to start the magic money machine and finance all of the wars going on for this, that, or the other. And that's always the answer. Print billions and billions and billions of dollars. And it's to the place where very soon just paying the interest on these debt to these international bankers, it's just going to absolutely stranglehold our nation, and it's going to absolutely bring it down. It's about global domination, global control. These people, just like John has brought forth this evening, they are identifiable. We can name them. We can look at their pictures, how this plan was implemented. We can even roll farther back in history, and the Rothschilds learned it from the Knights Templar, the first international bankers of the Rex Deus bloodline. This is an ancient plan that we're seeing to come to culmination right now. And what can we do about it? You turn to Jesus, with a real Jesus right now before it's eternally too late. The only anchor in the rock we're going to have at this time is Jesus Christ and Him crucified in the Word of God. And none of this is taking the Lord by surprise. He is in control. And when we commit ourselves to Him, when we repent and believe the gospel and accept that which Christ did upon the cross for us, we are serving the one who's really in charge. And it's time to turn to Jesus. It absolutely is.
Absolutely. And I wanted to read a couple, just read this because I think that it's really relevant to what we're talking about tonight. Revelation 18:23. And the light of the candle shall no more be all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by their sorceries were all the nations deceived. We've seen it play out and right in front of us. And then here's something that I believe this, guys. I believe we will win. I believe that our king will win. There will be, everyone will be reckoned for everything that they've done. Nobody's getting away with stuff. They may think they're getting away with it. They may think that they're getting away with all of these things in secret because they're able to fool everybody in the media. They're able to fool everybody in the world. But in the end, we have to have hope that evil will be vanquished and that we will be restored to what we were made to be. And I really believe that, and I'm thankful for that hope. That hope is something that I searched for my entire life. I remember at one time I was even, doing drugs. I was even just looking anywhere and everywhere that I could find some kind of fulfillment in my life. And I just was lost. I was lost, and I just was at the point to where I just wanted to give up. And I just thought in that moment, I said, you know what? I'm going to cry out to God. I'm going to ask Him if He's real, and I'm going to see if He can do something with me, because I can't do this anymore. I didn't like it. I didn't like what I was going with it. My flesh was too powerful. Control. It was in control, whether it be because of sex or whether it be because of drugs or whatever. My flesh was so powerful, and I couldn't resist the ways of the world. And I asked God, and He created a miracle in my life, showed me in so many ways He's real. I know a lot of people have heard, how that happened, but for me, it was an experience that I will never forget. I will never be more, I can't be more grateful than I am. And everything that I do right now, and everything David, I'm sure, feels the same way about his transition into this, but everything that I do now is based off of that moment. Everything that I am about, everything that I breathe is based on what He did for me, because if He can do it for me, He can do it for you. He can bring mysteries to light. Look, all of these mysteries, they're not mysteries to me. They're mysteries to a lot of people, and they're really scary things to a lot of people, but when you look at the things through the lens of God, the Holy Spirit who guides us into all truth and reveals mysteries to us, these things aren't scary. There's hope at the end of the tunnel. And we can see that. And it says in Jeremiah 51:20 through 23, thou art my battle axe. And this is talking about against Babylon. Thou art my battle axe and weapons of war. For with thee I will break in pieces the nations, and with thee I will destroy kingdoms, and with thee will I break in pieces the horse and his rider. And with thee will I break in pieces the chariot and his rider, and with thee also will I break in pieces man and woman. And with thee will I break in pieces old and young, and with thee will I break in pieces the young man and the maid. I will break in pieces with thee the shepherd of his flock, and with thee will I break in pieces the husband and his yoke, and of oxen, and with thee I will break in pieces captains and rulers. One day in that glorious time when war breaks out and the evil is vanquished, I hope to be a battle axe, and I hope you guys do too. And
Amen.
So, with that being said, David, that's all I have. We do this thing called the Pounders Pound, where you pound the like button. But I really want you guys to subscribe if you enjoyed this content. But we're gonna do the Pounders Pound. We hit it at the same time on the count of 3. David, let's do this. You ready?
1,
2,
2,
3.
boom.
Boom! Ba-boom! We got it. That was good, guys. Thank you so much for hitting that like button and subscribing. David, do you have anything else? And if not, end us out, man. Let's do this.
Well, I just love this ride. I just love it. This connects so many things that need to be connected. Great job, John. Great job.
Thank you.
Love it, love it, love it. And this is what we try to do on the Midnight Ride, to bring the very cutting-edge research into dots. Connecting things need to be connected. So we're just so thankful for all of you that are interested into really looking behind the curtain and see who's pulling the levers. So with that, with always great thanks to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and all of you, the Midnight Ride audience, we just want to say, until next Saturday night, 10 p.m. Central, high five and good night, everybody, from the Midnight Ride.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up, rise up, rise up.